Thanks. It's always good to be back. I appreciate this opportunity from the boards to be able to reflect on this important topic. Always appreciate the YDS tradition of academy and church joined together, working together to address the important issues of our time. I want to thank you for your really fine paper and just say that I think that particularly the questions in the last paragraph really are the right questions. I think as you worked all that through and came out there, that struck me as really the right place. Within the paper itself, I just want to say a word or two that I thought that I was just particularly struck by the linking of ethnic cleansing and trauma with church fights. That was new and sobering. But the point that we need to avoid the narrowing of identity and belief is, I think, critical. I also appreciated very much the section on belief and the description of the theological dialogue that a pastor can help to foster within the congregation and beyond, especially in this great time of change. I want to just really spend a little bit of time this afternoon offering some of my own thoughts about the particular area that we're talking about here, church changes in theological education, and to link them up a bit with some of what you said. I think I'm going to be covering some of the same territory in my own way, but I do think that one of the underlying, probably two underlying themes have to do with what you termed the untenable economic model of both congregation and then I would say denomination. I think that is a reality that we just have to come to grips with, and whether we intend to or not, probably in the next 5 years, we'll know it for sure if we don't already. And I just want to start a little bit backing up a little bit and looking at the landscape in which all of this is unfolding at the moment, particularly as I have a chance to look at it from my vantage point. I just want to say, as we all know, the church and the world are changing fast. When I talk to church people these days, I often refer to God's call to Abram and Sarai in Genesis 12. There, God speaks to 75-year-old Abram, probably about the age of a lot of the people I'm speaking to a lot of the time. And God says to Abram, I want you to go to a land where I will show you. No maps. No GPS, no known destination, just go. Abram and Sarai at this mature age pick up family and flocks and tents and they go. As with any move though they take a lot, they also have to leave a lot behind. Anybody ever moved? The church in the United States and Canada has also been called into a new place, a new territory for mission. For a while, we've been describing this landscape by what it is not. We've called it postmodern, post-Christendom, post-denominational. But I maintain that we've now been here long enough that we can begin to describe this territory by what it is, rather than what it's not. So I think that if we can describe the territory where we are a little bit more fully, it helps us determine what we're going to take with us and what we're going to leave behind as we move into the new territory. Another story for this time that's important to me is the parable of the friends who bring their paralytic friend to Jesus. They want their friend to have healing. They carry him to the house where Jesus is, but they cannot get him through the normal way. The crowds are blocking the front door, so they have to improvise. They have to create a new solution. They take their friend up onto the roof, and they get their friend to Jesus. Their friend receives healing and wholeness. As the church moves into this 21st century landscape for mission, we're going to need to not only determine what goes with and what gets left behind, but we're going to have to start figuring out what we invent new for tasks that appear to us in a new form that we have not met before. So, what does the new territory look like? There are 3 characteristics that I've begun to name among disciples. First, this territory is a kind of a borderland. In this landscape, as we well know now, mainline Christians and more some of the progressive evangelicals who we partner with are not the voices that are heard when people go looking for a Christian voice. Our values do not appear to be broadly shared in the wider culture. And so we've spent some time lamenting this. But now I think we're starting to see some of the advantages of this location. For one thing, there is a deep spirituality that is required of us here. It's a welcome opportunity to reconnect with God. Here on the borderlands, where our own strength fails us, where our own wits often leave us wandering lost, it becomes crystal clear that we need a guide and a support. Here in the borderlands, we know we rely on God, our Redeemer, and our hope. For a while here, we've been living in cities we did not build, drinking from cisterns we did not dig, from eating grapes that we did not plant, and we have all too often forgotten that it was God who brought us out of captivity. Too often we acted as though our enjoyed cultural and political privilege and power came because we really did pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. But out here on the borderlands, we find that we need to reconnect with a living, liberating, empowering God. Deepening our connection with the living God, equipping ourselves for life in these borderlands requires a serious spiritual formation and deep connection with the biblical story. A renewed commitment to the spiritual disciplines of prayer and biblical study are essential out here in this territory. They are the manna and quail of the church's life in this place. Second, in this 21st century, life is characterized by incredible diversity. I'm told that borderlands where distinct ecosystems intersect are often the places of greatest creativity and richest life. So too, here on the cultural borderlands of the 21st century in North America, different ideas and customs interact. Gifts and talents can be shared among people across a range of what we used to consider to be boundaries dividing us from one another. The diversity is of every kind. It's theological, generational, cultural, global. And it challenges us to define community much more broadly than we've been accustomed. In this landscape, enhanced multicultural capacity is necessary. This is part, I think, of engaging the shared plural aspects of who we are, as you indicated earlier. Thirdly, in this new territory, we can no longer assume that most people know the important biblical stories or the basic contours of Christian faith. This is true both outside and inside the church. That's why seminaries spend precious course hours doing remedial biblical work. This broad lack of acquaintance with the God of love and empowerment, who stands at the heart of biblical tradition, makes it particularly important in this new territory where we find ourselves to get over our mainline allergy to evangelism. It means that we need to find a way to tell the story that is authentic to a more progressive faith. Such evangelism is always going to include doing as well as talking, claiming social justice as part of the Christian life. But for the main line, it's been the words that have all too often escaped us. In this 21st century landscape, part of our mission is going to involve engaging verbally and helping to connect the dots between faith and faithful action. Now, this changing landscape has already affected the church in ways that have implication for theological education. And this is going to the untenable economic model again. In both seminary and church, we're going to need to realize that we are not necessarily preparing people for a lifelong career path any longer. One of our Disciples regional ministers told me recently that many of our clergy are already living lives of bone-deep disappointment. They thought they'd serve, starting in small congregations, gradually moving up to more prosperous ones, preaching, teaching, being a leader in community, and then retiring well. But it turns out there aren't enough larger congregations to go around anymore. Furthermore, the things that these pastors know how to do, partially learned in seminary, but partially learned in the church that nurtured them in the early days of their call, aren't necessarily producing the desired results. There are approximately 3,700 disciples congregations in the United States and Canada, 3,700. Only about 800 of them are financially viable enough to support at least one full-time seminary-trained minister, a building, and a full program of activities. We are not that different from the colleagues who I met with just a week ago, my counterparts, wondering about the future of the ecumenical movement and what we might do better together than trying to go our separate ways. 2/3 of our disciples' congregations have been in decline for at least a decade, well before the recent economic collapse. Now, we've had a remarkably successful new church movement, 650 new congregations in that same decade. But 80% of these congregations are predominantly immigrant congregations. Many of them are economically marginal, can't afford a building, can't pay their bivocational pastor, can't imagine sending that pastor to seminary, even if she or he ever gets to college. This tells us that in many ways the work of ministry is changing. But our church extension people, the ones that loan money to all of us to make our new church buildings, tell us that the building challenge is going to become more prevalent across the board. They're recommending that we all look seriously at helping congregations decide to give up ownership of their buildings and become one of many ministries using those buildings so that the significant capital wealth can be leveraged for multiple missions instead of squashing the life of the one ministry, the one worshiping community that occupies and tries to tend that building. It tells us the place of ministry may well be changing. So in this kind of landscape, on the borders, radically diverse, ignorant of the Jesus story and its God of love and justice, in this kind of a church, smaller, less affluent, more mobile, more outreaching, what kind of pastors do we need? Well, we need pastors who are deeply, deeply spiritual, who know God, not just the idea of God, and who are able to accompany parishioners in their own faith walks. We need pastors who are theologically articulate in the way that Mr. Nieman has described, able to name and help their congregations name understandings of God, those understandings that underlie their own prayer, their decisions, yes, even their fights. Pastors who can help engage those indigenous theologies in conversation with the theologies of other generations and thereby help today's church people deepen their understanding of God's interaction with people of faith throughout time and now. In order for this kind of theological dialogue to take place, we need pastors who are theologically and culturally multilingual, who can help congregations translate the story they know, the God they love, for other generations and subcultures in their context to be able to understand. But even more than translating what it is that we know, these multicultural, multilingual people will need to be able to engage in an exchange of knowledge. Congregations, like so many of ours, full of 20th century natives, need to figure out how to articulate what it is that we hold dear about God and why, and be able to share it in a language understood by younger 21st century natives, or to share with people of different language groups or racial ethnic groups or a different faith or non-faith. But we also need to be able to listen and to learn as we move more and more outside the church walls in order to fulfill God's mission in our time. And some of the questions that you raised about learning from seminarians and really being engaged in ongoing theological dialogue, I think is particularly pertinent here as we become culturally multilingual. Finally, in addition to being spiritually deep and biblically and theologically articulate, we need pastors who are also artful leaders of adaptive change. That kind of change that draws upon actual experience in order to create new tools for the tasks of a new time. Theological education needs to include a focus on the art of leadership, the setting of tables for stakeholders to gather in safety in order to bring their many gifts to address the issues at hand. Pastors have long been generalists. Today, pastors no longer need to be Jacks and Jills of all trades, but need rather to be able to gather information they need by crossing boundaries and borders and inviting to a hospitable table persons in the congregation or not who have skills and knowledge and investment needed for a particular undertaking. It's about convening the right people to engage in the task at hand. Most of those tables need to be set up to equip congregations to reach outside of the church itself in order to engage in the kind of mission that God has called us to, the kind of mission that gets their friends, their community, our world to the healing and wholeness that we know in Christ Jesus. In this 21st century context, then, seminary and church need to work together to form clergy who can help a congregation go deep spiritually, learn and communicate stories of faith, artfully lead in building and equipping community appropriate to its 21st century context, and communities that are focused outwardly with ministries of hope and wholeness. Thank you.